Hello and welcome to Semantic Reactions, the official podcast of the Institute of General Semantics. My name is Ben Hauk, and I'm pleased to be able to introduce the 26th installment in our ongoing series. For our October episode, IGS Trustees Eva Berger, Anton, and Lance Strate take part in a controversial discussion on some of the most recent developments in artificial intelligence and language models and their implications for the future, as well as their connections to general semantics. Let's listen in.
Well, welcome to another episode of Semantic Reactions, the official podcast of the Institute of General Semantics. I'm here with my fellow IGS trustees, Eva Berger and Anton, to talk about AI. But first, let's talk a bit about general semantics. After all, that's what we're here for. And let's hear what they have to say about GS.
Ever feel like you're stuck in some kind of communication black hole? Like everyone's on the same planet, speaking English, but somehow the messages get totally scrambled along the way.
Oh, tell me about it. It's such a common experience.
Right. It's like my superpower is accidentally starting arguments by just asking, how's it going?
Yeah, I've been there.
So frustrating. Which is why I'm kind of obsessed with this whole general semantics thing.
Oh, interesting.
Have you ever actually looked into it? It's like they took communication, all the ways we mess it up, and made a whole field of study out of it.
There is a surprising amount of depth to it, and thankfully, there's an organization that helps make sense of it all.
Right. The Institute of General Semantics, or IGS, as the cool kids say.
They're the real deal.
And they totally get it, you know? Like, they know this could be dry academic stuff, but they're all about making it practical, something you can actually use.
Exactly. It's not just theory, it's about real-life application.
Which I appreciate.
And they've been at it for a while, since 1938.
Wow. That's dedication.
Right. They really dive into how we use language, how it shapes our thoughts, all of that.
See, that's what gets me, how our words aren't just these neutral things floating around. They have an actual impact.
It's true, and it's something we often overlook.
Big time.
Think of it like a map.
Okay.
A map is helpful, right? But it's not the actual place, the territory itself.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So general semantics says language is kind of like that it's a representation of reality, but not reality itself.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
And problems pop up when we start treating the map like it is the territory, confusing the word with the actual thing.
So, like, when people argue about the best ice cream flavor.
Perfect example.
Because there isn't a best. It's all subjective.
Exactly. That argument's mixing up personal taste with some objective truth, like saying the map is wrong because you don't like the look of a mountain.
Mind blown. And we're just getting started.
Oh, there's so much more to uncover.
I'm kind of freaking out, not gonna lie.
The IGS, though, they're great about giving you all these resources, ways to learn.
They have that journal.
ETC, a review of general semantics, and it's been going strong since 1943.
1943, there must be, like, volumes upon volumes of this stuff.
A testament to how much there is to say about language, how it shapes our whole worldview.
It's a lot.
It is, but the IGS breaks it down in a way that's engaging and, most importantly, useful.
Well, that's good to know, because I already feel like I need a crash course in all of this, just from our conversation so far. ETC. It's kind of perfect when you think about it.
How so?
Like, there's always going to be more to say, always more to explore with language.
Oh, for sure. It's a never-ending process.
And you know what else is kind of cool? That book prize they have.
You mean the S.I. Hayakawa book prize?
Yeah, that's the one. S.I. Hayakawa. Rings a bell, right?
Oh, absolutely. He was a huge figure in the world of general semantics, a real pioneer.
For real.
He was a scholar, even a senator at one point, but always advocating for clear thinking, clear communication.
So the fact that they named a book prize after him, that's got to mean something.
Definitely. They clearly hold his work in high regard, see him as a model for what general semantics is all about.
I'm picking up what you're putting down. And speaking of books, they mentioned this whole reading group thing for Science and Sanity.
I saw that.
Catchy title.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, who doesn't want a little more science and sanity in their life?
Right. Sign me up.
But before we go totally off the rails here, talking about all the cool IGS stuff.
Always a temptation.
Let's bring it back down to earth for our listener.
Okay, yeah, good point.
Because, honestly, why should anyone care about any of this? What's the takeaway, the so what of general semantics?
It's a fair question. And honestly, where the rubber meets the road with all of this.
Lay it on me.
Think about it.
Yeah.
Understanding general semantics, it can legit make you a better communicator.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Not just that, a sharper, critical thinker, better equipped to deal with all the noise out there.
We could all use some help with that, am I right?
No doubt. Those everyday situations where communication really matters, that tough conversation at work, a disagreement with a family member, even just trying to get your point across in a meeting.
Been there, done that. Definitely struggled with those.
General semantics gives you tools to handle those situations better, more effectively.
So it's not about avoiding arguments altogether. It's about understanding where those breakdowns happen in the first place.
Exactly. It's about getting to the root of the issue, seeing things more clearly.
Which is something we desperately need in this day and age.
Yeah.
With information coming at us from a million different directions.
Absolutely. We're drowning in information overload, and it's easy to get swept away by it.
It's like you need a filter, some way to make sense of it all.
That's what general semantics provides. It's like a BS detector for the digital age, helping you cut through the noise and think more critically about what you're reading, seeing, hearing.
Love that. So it's not about ditching technology altogether. It's about using these principles to engage with it more effectively.
Right. Become a more discerning consumer of information, more thoughtful about what you share and create.
And hopefully bridge some of those divides that seem to be everywhere these days.
Exactly. Building bridges instead of walls. That's the goal.
I like the sound of that. So let's say someone's listening to this and they're like, all right, I'm sold. Where do I sign up for General Semantics 101?
Well, the IGS website is a great place to start.
Makes sense.
They have a ton of resources available, background information, key figures, even applications of general semantics in different fields.
Like a one-stop shop.
Pretty much. And like we mentioned, they have courses, events, that reading group.
Oh, yeah. Imagine that, being in a room full of people who are all into clear thinking and effective communication.
That's the dream. A whole community dedicated to putting these principles into practice.
Maybe we should check it out ourselves.
I'm down. Speaking of which, that Science and Sanity book, it's a pretty fascinating example of general semantics in action.
Oh, yeah. What's the deal with that book?
Well, it was written by Alfred Korzybski, the guy who basically founded general semantics.
So kind of a big deal.
Just a little. And in Science and Sanity, he makes this really interesting argument, he says, that by applying the principles of science.
You know, observation, experimentation, all that good stuff.
Exactly. Applying those principles to our everyday language and thinking, we can actually improve our mental health and make the world a better place.
Whoa, hold on. He's saying that our thinking is connected to our well-being.
That's the idea. He believed a lot of human suffering, both on a personal and societal level, comes from flaws in our thinking.
That those flaws are often reflected in the way we use language.
Bingo! So, by changing the way we talk and think, we can potentially create a more sane and humane world.
I mean, it's a bold claim, but I kind of love it.
It's about recognizing the power of our words, using them more consciously to foster understanding and empathy.
It's almost like they're giving you a new lens to view the world through.
Totally. A lens that helps you see things more clearly, navigate those tricky situations with more intention.
And hopefully avoid those communication black holes we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. It's an ongoing process, but the more you practice, the more ingrained these principles become.
It's like learning a new language, but for your mind.
I love that analogy because it highlights the transformative potential of general semantics.
It's not just about memorizing rules, it's about fundamentally shifting your relationship with language and thought.
And as you delve deeper, you start to see its relevance everywhere you look.
In your relationships at work, even in how you process information online.
Exactly. It's about constantly reflecting, refining, becoming a more conscious and effective communicator.
Which, let's be honest, is something we can all benefit from, no matter who you are or what you do.
Couldn't agree more. It's a lifelong journey, and the IGS provides the support and guidance to help you along the way.
They really do seem like they've thought of everything, although there is one thing that's been on my mind.
Oh, what's that?
They keep talking about modern scientific thinking applied to language, which is all well and good.
Right, using science to understand how we communicate.
But what was considered modern back in 1938 when they started
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
is ancient history now. I mean, think about it. We've got social media, the 24/7 news cycle.
It's a whole new world, right?
Exactly. So could general semantics actually be even more relevant today than when it was first developed? It's like they opened for business right before the world went absolutely bonkers with information.
Right, and that's what I find so fascinating. It's like you take these principles that were developed almost a century ago.
Way back when people still thought newspapers were like high technology.
Exactly. But those principles, they still resonate today, maybe even more so in our current climate.
It's like they were ahead of their time.
Yeah.
They could see where things were headed.
It's remarkable. Think about it. How many times do you see those arguments online? People completely talking past each other, mistaking opinions for fact.
Oh, all the time. It's like a national pastime at this point.
And misinformation. Something gets shared, it goes viral. No one stops to question whether it's even true.
Because who's got time for that when there are memes to be liked?
Right. But that's where general semantics comes in. It's like, hold on a second. Let's take a breath. Let's look at this critically.
Don't believe everything you read on the internet. Who knew?
It's about being savvy, discerning, not just getting swept up in the current.
So we're not saying throw your smartphone in the ocean. We're saying use these principles to navigate the digital world more effectively.
Exactly. Become a more conscious participant in the flow of information rather than just a passive recipient.
Because let's be real, we're all creating information now, whether it's a social media post or just a text to a friend.
Oh, absolutely. Our words have an impact, and general semantics helps you be more mindful of that impact.
It's like that whole think before you speak thing, but
Yeah.
on a much deeper level.
Right. It's about intentionality, awareness, understanding the weight of what you're putting out there.
Which, I gotta say, feels kind of refreshing in a world where everything's so reactive, so off the cuff.
Totally. It's about slowing down, being deliberate, considering the consequences.
Easier said than done, right?
Oh, for sure. It's a practice, just like anything else. The more you engage with these ideas, the more natural they become.
It's like anything else, you gotta put in the reps.
Exactly. And over time, you start to notice those shifts in your own thinking, those aha moments where you catch yourself making assumptions or using language in a way that's not quite aligned with these principles.
It's like you're becoming more aware of your own thought patterns, your own biases.
It's a process of self-discovery as much as anything else, and that's what makes it so empowering.
So it's not just about being a better communicator, it's about being a better thinker, a more self-aware human being.
That's the beauty of it. It's about personal growth, expanding your understanding of yourself and the world.
This has been a trip. Who knew we'd go from communication breakdowns to self-actualization in one conversation?
Only with general semantics. It's a
Right.
wild ride.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap things up.
I'm with you.
But before we go, we want to leave you with something to ponder.
Always.
We've talked a lot about the Institute of General Semantics, their work, their resources.
They're a treasure trove of information, that's for sure.
They are. And if this deep dive has piqued your curiosity, even just a little bit, I'd say dive in. Head over to their website, check out their journal, ETC.
It's a wild ride through the world of language.
And who knows, you might just find yourself signing up for that Science and Sanity reading group after all.
You never know where a little curiosity might lead.
That's the truth. So until next time, keep those brains buzzing, keep those conversations flowing, and as always, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
And as you may have guessed, that was not the real Eva Berger and Corey Anton. That was AI. And in fact, it was something created by Eva herself, who is studying AI as part of her research. So Eva, you want to tell us a little bit about that other alien podcast that we just listened to?
Yeah, well, I was really surprised when I first encountered it. A friend of mine sent me something he did for his company, for the company that he works for. And he said, just listen to this and let me know what you think. And I listened to it. And first of all, I was concentrating on the content. And I thought, oh my God, finally I understand what your company does. I've known you for years and you're never good enough to explain this. So I asked him, how much did you pay for these people to be so enthused about your company? I mean, it's about solar energy. I can understand people getting enthusiastic, but this sounds honestly more like a commercial than like a serious podcast. What is it? And he said, okay, gotcha. It's not human. And all I did was feed the link to my company's website into this thing called Notebook LM, language model. And it did it in like 5 minutes, 3 minutes, this was done. And I'm really curious. I'm writing about AI these days, more specifically about prompting and prompts as a way of communicating with machines. And the first thing that came to mind was, let's see what it does with our IGS website, a link just feed it the link to our website. And it took, again, about 3 minutes, and this was done. And I must say, of course, I wasn't fooled, and I knew I had done it myself, and I knew these were not humans. Still, it is so hard to not believe that it's human. I mean, there are glitches. You could hear that they don't interrupt each other, and our journal is called etc. and not etc. But this will be fixed. This will be fixed, and it's going to get better with time. And then I just I sent it to all of our board, and the reactions have been amazing, because I think it does a pretty good job in explaining in a friendly way what IGS is. I'm being careful with the verb is, to be, but how we define general semantics, and what are some of the activities that the Institute does. And their sort of enthusiasm is contagious.
Well, we might hope so, but it certainly sounds a lot like a commercial or a promotional spot. I mean, I love how they're pushing the reading group, which, by the way, if you are listening to this and it's still 2024, that reading group is continuing up until close to the end of December. So there's still time to hop on. Do I sound like the AI now? But yeah, etc. The fact that they don't interrupt each other is very interesting. It makes me think. I teach one course on science fiction film, and I have them watch The Thing from 1951, which was produced by Howard Hawks. And in that movie, he tried an experiment of having the characters talk over each other to make it seem more realistic, but it doesn't work. I mean, it really doesn't work so well in a kind of dramatic medium. But they're also just too perfect, aren't they? There's no flaws. There's no kind of stumbling in the way that they talk.
In a way, too perfect is an interesting place to even start talking about this. Because if I think about platforms, AI platforms, for example, to create visuals, to create things that look like photographs, or things that look like paintings, and it's gotten me thinking about the difference between vision and hearing, and how AI connects to this. Perhaps it's easier to make AI sound human, easier than to make it look human.
Yeah.
I would say, again, I want to thank you, Eva, for turning me on to it. It really blew my mind, and it inspired me to go play with the system. I mean, I played with it over just the last several days, but it's as if the system somewhat, it emulates the genre style of the information it's accessing. So in those things that look like they're promotional, so if you go to someone's website, or if you go to someone's academia.edu or their LinkedIn, it can feel the kind of promotional vibes, and then it replicates this kind of enthusiastic advertising sales pitch kind of orientation. But if you upload, a technical academic document, it doesn't have those same sort of enthusiastic cadences. It almost leaves, I think, anybody who's played with it speechless. I think it's somewhat optimistic in that every student can now have a tutor, and no matter how difficult an article is, you can make the author speak from the dead. I mean, you can interact with it.
So I can be optimistic if we can trust humans to use it in a sort of productive way rather than a lazy way.
Yeah. I mean,
well,
I would echo that sentiment. I mean, I feel as if, to the hungry student who's really struggling with a very difficult reading, they're trying to read Bateson, they're trying to read Dewey or Burke or Langer, and they're kind of at a loss. it is amazing that they can then listen to a podcast that makes a lot of that information so much more digestible. And then after listening to the podcast, they can go into it and they can interact and they can ask questions. And as you suggest, they can have study guides made, they can have review questions, they can have outlines. I think the concern is that, as they use it, people will say, well, I really can't do the reading. And so I'm just going to start with the podcast. And soon, they're going to only do the podcast. And, again, the medium is the message, that there's something about reading and the analytical developments of certain kinds of thought that come from studying a text. And it seems like this kind of digital orality is on the rise the more that any text can be turned into a podcast.
But I would take it even further, because watching a video or listening to a podcast takes time. And the AI, these kind of programs are used to digest that into a much smaller bit of time. I thought, Corey, it was also interesting that you referred to the AI as watching the video, which I don't think I'm not quite sure that that's a correct way to put it. But it also makes me think of what Walter Ong's point, that what you can recall, that without, we have all this information at our fingertips, but if it's not internalized, then it's not our information, it's not our knowledge, it's just something that we might be able to access, and then won't be able to if we're cut off from it. And I also think of Neil Postman's point about how when we go about trying to solve problems, but once we do, we just don't stop, that we just keep going. And he used that as an argument against information technology, that in the 19th century, we needed more information, but in the late 20th century, that was no longer a problem, but we don't know how to stop. And I think, the same thing is undoubtedly going to happen, or is happening, with the AI.
And that actually more information became the problem. Not only did we not know when to stop, but not only is lack of information not the problem, but information glut.
Exactly. And overload.
I think we have examples of why perhaps we can trust humans to use this the way that would make us better humans. First of all, I don't remember what they were called. In the United States, there were like these little books that were short versions of like War and Peace,
Digests.
that like digests, or students
No.
would buy the little booklets that
Oh, the
gave
Cliff Notes,
Cliff Notes.
Yeah.
Like 20, and they didn't really know the text, and you remember what you internalized, and what you internalized were 20 pages that are like the most general storyline, and not the depth of the characters, and not the
Right.
the deeper philosophical ideas behind relationships in a family. You don't really know the text, and this is still in the age of print, certainly when you're doing like short snippets. Another example, I think, is the pretty good research by now of how much students who take handwritten notes in class remember, as opposed to those who type their notes in class. Those who write remember more, internalize more, understand better.
Yeah.
I just want to follow up that, Lance. I'm not sure what the right word to use is regarding the way that the system incorporates a YouTube video. I'm not sure watch is right, but I'm not sure digest is right either. I'm not sure what it is. I guess the only point that I was trying to make is that it was a 20-minute YouTube video, and it ended up only taking 5 minutes to produce an 11-minute podcast. How is it, I think the transcription services of YouTube, I don't think it was using like the closed captioning. It wasn't reading the text. It wasn't, I'm not sure how it was, I'm not sure exactly what it was doing. I mean, and I noticed, when I ran the Bateson piece through, and the Bateson's Theory of Playing Fantasy, and I uploaded it, the podcast it's introducing all kinds of examples that Bateson never talks about. It's talking about gazelles and gazelles' use of certain kinds of things in the wild. I mean, it was extrapolating. It wasn't just simply, repeating verbatim what was in the text. I mean, it was doing other things.
Yeah. But I think analyze might be the word, that what is a video or any digital content is data, and it's analyzing the data.
I think this, for me, the stunning part of playing with some of this stuff is that I think it leaves all of us in the humanities who have been students of meaning for decades. It leaves us a little bit of a loss because I'm not sure exactly, how to describe the intelligibility of these systems, knowing that they don't understand and they don't really have a sense of meaning other than like what fits in the language. Like it doesn't seem to have those senses of inwardness and understanding the various kinds of qualia that go along with what we mean by meaning. Like it's very odd, and that's why I think it does have this eerie sense of like these systems are better readers than like anyone I know. I mean, its ability to tell you what Dewey's getting at is incredible. And that's a very dense, very thick read. And it seemed to have real command over it.
Well, for me, it feels a little bit better when you start talking about it as it. It's already more accurate, but it's so tempting to talk about the characters talking about this, whether it's a YouTube video. We talk about them, right?
Yeah.
At the beginning of the podcast, Lance said, why don't you, here's Eva and Corey, and it wasn't us. But then for, I think, a few minutes, we kept talking about them as opposed to us, and this sort of personification of artificial voices put together from millions of different voices and from different podcasts that already exist. I mean, their voices, the voices used sound like a lot of the podcasts, really good ones, some of them, like the voices
Better than this one.
better than this one, certainly. But like really the classics, like Serial, for example, right? These sound like very professional, really good narrators and really good conversationalists. I also have been impressed by, I've been looking at other platforms, and there's one called, let me see, there's one called Undetectable AI. Undetectable AI. And it's interesting because just like I was saying, professors are going to look for platforms that allow them to check if this was a paper written by a human or was it written by AI. These platforms already exist, and this Undetectable AI one, you can upload a paper or a book or whatever, and people write with the help of AI. And with the help of platforms such as this one, other people check if it was written by AI. And on the same platform, you have the possibility to press a button that says humanize.
Oh, wow.
Yes, there's a button where you can say, okay, here's my writing. I got a lot of help to write this from a different platform called, I don't know, Perplexity or ChatGPT or whatever it is. Now humanize it for me. So the same platform that's allowing you to check if others' writing is human or machine is helping you to make your even original writing, or certainly AI-assisted writing, sound more human. So it's this solipsistic, crazy world.
Oh, but that makes sense. I mean, it's probably not that hard to introduce the imperfections that humans are prone to. I think of the fonts that were created that were made to look like old manual typewriter fonts with with a lot of imperfections. But
that was
yeah.
more for sort of nostalgia's sake.
Yeah. Yeah,
right?
for aesthetic reasons, but
Here it's for fooling
yeah,
others who think that it's human.
yeah. I can't help think about Jean Baudrillard and his concept of simulation and hyperreality, which he referred to as more real than real.
Right.
Which is also that the map precedes the territory in that respect, and kind of rules out or overrules the territory. And then Ridley Scott's Blade Runner film has the artificial beings called replicants referred to as more human than human. And in a way, that's what we're getting here, is the more human than human, but it is a new notion of perfection that is unprecedented in a very human activity. But we've been getting there all along with things like editing. That when writing's introduced, you can edit discourse and make it more perfect. And when you have the ability to edit sound recordings, you can create perfection that can never be reproduced in actual performance. Movies piece together bits and pieces of a performance to create something that never existed before, that never existed in reality. So it really is just one further step along those lines.
Well, it seems like it's cutting in both directions in some way. Like, for example, yeah, it may introduce, I guess, kinds of humanistic errors into perfectly written AI in order to humanize the writing. But I think the point about the podcast is that it's the cadences, the inflections, the sort of spontaneous sound fluctuations that are part of their language that gives it this veneer of being real people. And like I can imagine that gets so perfected that at a certain point, then they have to cut in the other direction. They have to introduce someone who has an occasional disfluency, an occasional stutter, an occasional that try to, it's a processing of thought and this kind of stuff.
Well, that's the humanized, right, Ava?
Well, no,
Right.
I'm saying the humanized goes in the other direction as well. Like right now, they've tried to take it from like the robotic discourse of Star Trek into these like inflections and cadences of spontaneous interaction. I mean, the podcast sounds very human. And to that extent, some of the meaning that's coming across, it came from the ultra attention to the finest little nuances in the way things are said, not just the semantic meaning of the words that are being employed.
You know that Jaron Lanier, I don't know how you pronounce
Yeah.
his name. He sort of predicted this. I wrote about him and I quoted him in my book, and I found the piece where he says just a few lines. He says, "To make the distinction clear, I'll invent a way to ruin podcasting. Some crummy person could make an app that transcribes all the podcasts available in a store and synthesizes a new artificially intelligent podcast that combines snippets from lots of different podcasts that, as one example, contain the same set of keywords. You could say, I want to hear opinions about X political candidate, or maybe about some celebrity. Then you'd hear a rapid fire sequence of people saying things about the subject. You would not hear what had come just before each snippet or what comes next. And I used it because he says that what makes podcasts back then in 2018, when he was writing, into such a great form of communication is that it is contextual, that it is humans speaking to human about a specific topic, with all of those imperfections that we've been talking about before, calling it humanizing, which is the most inhuman or unhuman sounding.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and that raises, that some issues that are coming to the fore about copyright, that if you are sort of lifting these bits and pieces from other people's work, are you violating copyright by doing that? And, also, I mean, do you owe anyone anything if you're training. And I love these anthropomorphic terms that we use: training, hallucinations, but I mean, if you're so-called training, I'm using quote unquote training AI using my material, do you owe me anything for doing that? I mean, and that is a legal question that is unresolved at this point.
And some people who believe that they don't owe you or me or anyone's work that's been used to train the technology. It happened before in music. I mean, what is the idea of a remix? If not, DJs taking existing pieces of music, putting them together in a new form, perhaps adding a certain beat that was not there before, and making a whole place, jump while they are dancing, and are those snippets of sound that were originally in somebody else's?
Well, that's sampling. That's really that's really where we're getting at something where there's that whole argument of creating something new. It's the collage, the mashup, I mean, is that
And
something
our
new
words,
or
but can we talk about words and writing like sampling?
yeah.
Can you
I mean, if
sample?
I start taking McLuhan's work and I take them, chapter by chapter and article by article and upload them and then create a podcast from each one, then I create a page that's all these podcasts. I would think the McLuhan Institute would not like that. They would say, "Hey, stop doing that." I don't know. Are they comfortable with it? And I noticed too, like when I ran some of the texts in, I have review sheets that open each text. So I like have study questions that are already placed in there for the students. And it incorporated that. And like the podcast kind of geared around the review sheet that was on the top of the chapter or the article.
It sounds really smart. That's what's so scary about it. And I've also been thinking, Lance, I think I quoted you from somewhere, so I know it's you, but it's odd and maybe alarming that while there are opportunities to listen, more and more opportunities to listen than in the past, and choices as to what to listen to. We have more and more of that. But we have apparently gotten so used to smooth and edit those edited voices on real podcasts where it's humans being recorded as they converse or when they're talking about something. Will this new stage of make-believe podcasts, so to speak, where it's not really humans talking about anything, but summarizing in a sort of dialogue sounding way, will it make it even worse that public speaking is to many young people very scary? Their ability to engage in conversation and listen to others, as it becomes even slicker, it'll be even scarier because this podcast right now is the best example of me stuttering until I finally get to what it is that I want to say. But young people, are scared. They don't like synchronic communication. They'd rather record their messages for someone because they can erase it if it was wrong. They can edit it. They want to hear what others left them as a message before deciding what to answer. And this idea of live, not live television, not live anything, live conversation may be even more troublesome to them than it already is.
And Sherry Turkle wrote about that just, again, in regard to social media and texting and how that, creates this idea of editing and putting together your best self as opposed to real face-to-face conversation and even live interaction over media like the telephone or the Zoom, and where we have our influences, our stutters and our us and as, and, you know, all that paralinguistic stuff that is less than perfect.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
tempting, I must say. If I were to be invited to talk about something on a podcast, I'm almost tempted to say, you know what, let me send it to you and
Yeah.
have these really professional sounding voices do the talking for me after I have uploaded a document, doing it better than me when it comes to speech, not to writing, but when it comes
Right.
to speech, this element of AI that sounds like humans is, I think, scary because speech is still, to this point, our most basic form of communication.
I mean,
And
don't you think it recovers the demand for public speaking, for conversational skills? Because, you know, like I've noticed it, you know, the increase of students using AIs on their papers, even for exams, you know, they will, instead of rereading and studying the text, they will upload the PDF, they will listen to the podcast, they will do some interaction with it, maybe even take my review sheet and run the review sheet through it, and then they sort of create their study resources from there. But then that makes me want to have classrooms where they're not using computers, not using phones. It almost goes back to this old school, not memorization, but if they haven't internalized it and can't spontaneously speak it or write it or convey it, well, then it's, you know, it's that's going to be the discriminator. That's going to be the how you decide who's doing well and who's not, because otherwise you're not sure how much of it is really them or how much of it's the AI.
and I'll give you an example. There are already platforms that for business and for marketing that do this. There's one called Blaze. And you know, people are creating these cross-platform campaigns. Until not too long ago, if you wanted a Facebook post, you could ask for it to sound like a Facebook post. And if you wanted a TikTok video, then you should go somewhere else and then you should upload it. And this Blaze platform creates content in, you know, quantities that it's hard to believe, you know, the quantities. And it posts it after writing it or creating it in the tone appropriate for each one of these platforms. If it's for Twitter, then it has to be, of course, first of all, short enough and sound perhaps more like a, you know, breaking news kind of thing, like a short thing, and then it posts it to Twitter. And for the same product or for the same service that you are now trying to sell, it will do this whole thing, including write your newsletter and send it to your mailing lists. So in those areas, I'm not sure thinking on your feet. I mean, in presentations in business, you know, it's not that much being really good thinking on your feet than having a really amazing, well thought out, you know, elevator presentation that you can do in 4 minutes and say everything that you need to say so that the sharks decide whether they're going to invest in your project or not. I'm not sure outside of what we do. It's going to be such an asset to
You know, the other side of it too is that you know, the people on the receiving end are not going to want to rely on themselves, and they're going to turn to AIs to actively search out what they're looking for, or boil down what, you know, the stuff that the other AI has produced into a kind of yes or no, you know, binary decision as well.
And we can go on vacation while they do that, both sides. And again, it makes me think there are older examples of this that were sort of precursors. I think answering machines, for those listening to us who still remember what that was. You remember leaving a message for someone who wasn't home and they got home and listened to it. This is way before smartphones. And then you called back and the person originally calling you wasn't home. So you left a message, and it was in the end like machines talking to each other without humans, you know, finally finding each other at home to have a real conversation. And still it was humans leaving messages for
Or
each other.
or even better was when we started to use VCRs to record programs that we never were going to watch.
Right.
Like, the PBS programs, and it was enough that it was recorded, and that, we had the sense, well, we'll watch it sometime, but just not now.
The thing about the podcast, the original one that you spread around, it was certainly the cadences, the spontaneity, the fluidity of the discussion, but it was also the accuracy of the content, and that we were able to judge the output. See, judging the output of all of these different AI systems, that's going to demand competencies. You can't just say, well, the AI is going to produce content, it's going to post stuff, but somebody has to be judging that content at some point, right?
Well, that's, I think, the biggest scare of all, the biggest danger, the day we're not able to.
See, but that's what I'm saying. My whole point is that in order to tell whether or not a person is going to have the competency to judge an output, you can't just expose them to the content. You're going to have to hear what they say about what's been produced, or no.
Yeah, no, we're on your side, Corey. We're just looking at the human tendency to not do that, and to say, okay, let's have the AI judge the content of the other AI, and trust that AI will be even better than the person at making that evaluation. And I'm not saying that's right or that's desirable, but it's just, that's, when you look at the history of technology, I mean, that does seem to be the kind of direction that we would go in. I think, part of it too is complexity, that, the human mind and human knowledge has its limitations. And I mean, everything does in a finite universe, but the limitations of this technology is way beyond what any one mind can hold on to. So, it seems like it'll be beyond anyone's ability to really determine whether something is correct or not, except again by the empiricism, by actually testing things out, trying them out. But that there was the idea about just computer programs, and we if you're old enough, listeners, you remember Y2K and all of the agita about that. And the reason for that was not just that all these programs didn't only had 2 digits for the year rather than the 4-digit year, um, but because the programs were so incredibly complex. I mean, apart from simple programming that you might do on, just as an exercise, or as a little bit of a kind of shareware type of thing, most programs are created by teams of people, and maybe created by large numbers of people over a long period of time as they're changed and modified. And that whenever you add in some kind of patch, which is what they had to do to account for the 4-digit year, when we went over to the 2000s, you add a patch and you're not 100% sure how that's going to affect it, because it's such a large and complicated system. So then when we take this as this is a system now that has incorporated an entire library full of knowledge, it is beyond anyone's person to to fully grasp and fully be able to evaluate what is going on with that system. And that's where the old computing saying garbage in, garbage out no longer applies. It only applied early on when one person knew the input and output of a computer program. But most computer programs, even things like video games that you might play, they are just beyond any one person's grasp. Of course, then you get another AI to evaluate that code,
Right.
and
Right.
that's how you.
And that gets further complicated by the fact that you can now code without knowing coding, using natural language, asking the AI. I mean, it's as of now not so simple, but soon it will be that you can, ask the AI to imagine a program that is able to do 1, 2, 3, and 4 things, and you ask it to write the code for it. And then you can ask it to test it, and you can ask it to fix for bugs. And you don't have to be good at coding or no coding at all. So natural language has become, paradoxically, the most powerful tool. And what I'm hoping is that perhaps it will make us become really good and precise and scientific in our use of language. If we want the AI to provide the results that we're expecting, we're going to have to be really good, really
So
accurate.
we need AI trained on general semantics,
Yes, we do.
but we also need people trained that
Yes,
way as well.
absolutely. Yes.
Eva, I was wondering if since this was part of a research that you're working on, could you tell us a little bit more generally about what what it is that you're working on?
Yeah, this is such a huge world, and I'm fascinated by it. And from the moment, the buzz was out there and people started talking about it, it was clear that it's something that I'm interested in. But it's such a huge. You were talking about, the libraries upon libraries being fed into programs, the stuff out there from the very beginning, not only of the things that you're able to do with AI, but the analyses being done of what AI can do. And I was thinking, what am I most interested in here? And I think I got to the conclusion that my book is called The Prompt. Because I think that's the key to everything, even of what we've been talking about here. Prompting. Obviously, I go back in history to how we've used the word prompt in the past, how we prompt other people to do certain things, and how babies prompt humans to take them to the switch so that they can turn the light on just by pointing. Those are early prompts. The most early prompt is our first cry, and our cries when we're babies. Those are prompts. They're instructions, to humans what we need, and we have them do it. And if they don't do what we intended them to do, then we cry even harder. So I take the idea of what prompting means philosophically and evolutionarily speaking, until I get to prompts and prompting the way it is meant right now to interact with the technology. And in the end, I'm far from finished, but I think Chris Nystrom was right in her piece called Literacy as Deviance. I think we were meant to talk to each other and to machines from the very beginning, and this writing thing was a terrible deviation.
Well, prompt also means immediacy. Let's
Yes,
do it now. And
that's right. It means do it and do it now. How do we talk to the technology? Questions and queries as opposed to commands. And in the end, the thing I'm most interested in is, who do we become as humans as a result of the technology requiring us to act in a certain way, to communicate with it in a certain way? What happens to how we communicate with each other as a result?
I think it's all changing so quickly that, I've been trying to follow this AI stuff now for a couple of years, and you get a sore neck because every day there's some new system that's out that's doing things. And I think, we've been talking largely about just generative AI, largely in, I'll say it, academic kind of ways, very, very academic. I think in the science realms, this stuff is very, very different. Like, for example, I think just recently, right, Nobel laureates were given, right, for the AlphaFold, right, in chemistry, and Gregory Hinton got it in physics, and Geoffrey Hinton got it in physics. And so, I mean, the AI is making its way into like a lot of scientific communities. And like, for example, when ChatGPT first came out, and then the New Yorker had the article called the lossy JPEG argument, where the claim was that because of the stuff's been data scraped, it's all going to be just a lossy JPEG, where soon enough, it's an imperfection of it's a reprinting that ends up with an informational degradation. Whereas when you go look at like what synthetic data is being talked about in things like AlphaFold or AlphaZero, now you're getting to like information that humans would have maybe hit upon after centuries of study, but so that it's no longer a degraded form of information, but it's a superior form of information.
Yeah, we should also note that before AI, just the computer itself was with the use of computers, mathematical problems were being and statistical problems were being solved in ways that were either impossible or would have taken an extraordinary long time previously. So, again, to the point that it's not unprecedented, it's just amplified to an extraordinary degree.
I mean,
That's a very good point. I remember the hype when Kasparov lost to the chess program.
Deep Blue, right? That's right. It was in '97, Gary Kasparov. I mean, I think Google's claim, their claim, and I don't know how to judge this claim. Is it true or not? Their claim was that in a few weeks they did 400 million years worth of research and can now predict accurately the folding of some 200 million proteins, basically all known proteins. And now they have another system called Alpha Protea, something like that. And it's now they're predicting, the production of enzymes that work with these proteins. What this will mean for health? It's beyond me. I have no idea. It's utterly incredible. It's breathtaking.
Well, maybe, there's no doubt that when it comes to efficiency, and I'm thinking of Jacques Ellul here, technology, and including this technology, will always win out and always give us more efficient solutions. But there's still the question of who's posing the problems, who's evaluating, and remember that general semantics is all about evaluation. And who's evaluating them and deciding whether to implement the solution or not. And ultimately, and this is one of Jacques Ellul's points, is who has responsibility? Think of like a self-driving car, as an example, and I've brought this up in other instances that a self-driving car gets into an accident, maybe harms somebody, and who's responsible? Is it the driver who's not really driving, but is sort of initiating it? Is it the person who coded the software? Is it the car manufacturer? It becomes harder and harder. And again, it speaks to complexity, the complexity of the technology. Becomes harder and harder to say who is responsibility or for any, to assign to anyone responsibility. And I think that is where we see this technology in particular heading, is that just placing all responsibility on it. Martin Buber has a very interesting comment that responsibility starts with response, the ability to respond. But this technology does respond. So what then?
That's the most dangerous part of it, because if we can learn anything from social media and asking Zuckerberg to take responsibility for things that the technology is doing, and him trying to not take responsibility, saying it's not him or human decisions, but in the name of the platform being open to everyone, these are some of the things that are going to happen because the algorithm is such. Take it one step further, and there's not even one person that you can call to Congress to ask them to take responsibility for things that will be happening, and I'm sure are happening already.
So I have a quick question for you, Eva. Did you try to run that URL a second or a third or a fourth time, or did you have other people run the URL?
I didn't, and actually that's an interesting point. If it will come out differently, how different will it be if it's done again? One thing's for sure, if you use, for example, Perplexity a platform that I actually really if you ask the same question again, even worded the same way, you will not get the same answer, not in the exact same way each time.
I agree with that, but I would also add Perplexity will give you much more redundancy than, say, ChatGPT. Like, so if you ask a series of questions that are almost identical, it will give nearly identical output in the way ChatGPT is rangy. It's all over the place. And you can prompt, you know, if you ask 111,111,111, is it a prime number? And you ask that to ChatGPT, it'll say something like yes. And then you go, are you sure? And it'll go, no. And you go, are you sure? And it'll go, yes. If you go to Perplexity and you ask that exact same question, it'll go, no, here's the formula. And it cites the sources. And so it has a kind of consistency of a research tool in a way that ChatGPT does not.
I agree. So those are some of the differences, but I've had Perplexity give me the source that does not exist.
Sure.
Make up a source.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Well, you can check the hallucinations there. I mean, you can, you know, that has that ability.
You know,
Which
going
that
back
drives
to,
me crazy.
Yeah.
Hallucinations.
Yeah.
Again, it's just so anthropomorphized.
right.
Well, I think the thing is that people hallucinate. You know, to use that word. I mean, I'm really close to writing a
Yeah.
book called "I Can't Stop Hallucinating," and I think that, you know, the hallucinations are baked into the systems because humans hallucinate. And in the same way that it was literacy as it first made its way through the, you know, the pastor speaking in a way like a book, and like there was normative demands on English to become more like somebody's reading aloud, or that, you know, the sort of syntax and grammar have become more literate as people grew literate. It's as if the more that people create AIs that could be hallucination free, the more they're going to realize that people just can't stop hallucinating. They're going
Well,
to
but
struggle.
the point is that humans hallucinate.
Yeah, right.
No,
Right. AI.
masses of humans, what certain elements of masses of humans fed into a machine cannot hallucinate.
Well, people kind
Yeah,
of make stuff up
it's-
all the time.
Right, they do that, but that's not hallucinating. It's just the use of that word, which is inappropriate. And it's actually one of Neil Postman's arguments, is that how technology changes language. So suddenly we're using hallucinate in a way that is totally different from what it's meant up to now. And that is a kind of, I love his phrase that he used for that, the demeaning of meaning. And that, you know, and that's what goes on, you know, in this instance. We're talking about the, you know, and in some sense, all of our reality, you know, if we follow Korzybski, is a hallucination. We're all making it up as we go along, based on information we're taking in from the outer environment, of course. But
Right. At the moment it's language, it's hallucination.
yeah. But you know, I think it, you know, an interesting point I would just, you know, throw out there then is that because of this perfection, and we see when they're making stuff up, we see that that's not good. We don't want them to do that. So that's an error that will eventually be corrected. And you get this sort of perfection coming out of them. Just, you know, to get back to that point, that a lot of human creativity comes from imperfection, and also from misunderstanding or misusing intentionally of material. And that's you know, at least one kind of distinction. You know, again, I think of Neil Postman's point. I think he called it Columbicity, you know, just that Columbus thought he was going to the Indies. He went to his grave, claim, you know, insisting that he just went to the Indies, to Asia. You know, that sometimes we arrive at the right, you know, some new discovery by making a mistake and being mistaken. And you know, it's also, I mean, people are, you know, will just appropriate things for their own purposes, and cite things or use things in ways that aren't actually accurate to the source, but that the source kind of brought up, you know, made them think about. So there's something, again, human perhaps, about the mistakes and the imperfections that we might lose.
And the day the AI sounds like it's making the mistake, it's going to be even worse, because then you'll completely, like with the IGS fake podcast, we knew at some point that it wasn't, or pretty quickly we knew it wasn't, because it was perfect. If it were better at sounding imperfect. I mean, not just, what I'm saying is not just on the deeper philosophical level that you were referring to, but even on like the basic. I keep telling my students not to talk to AI saying, please do this, because you're helping it sound human. It becomes polite if we all talk to it politely. Not that it's going to make a difference if my students don't, because it's a matter of numbers and masses.
I mean, do you remember when Cleverbot was first released onto the internet? And I mean, people harassed it and swore at it, and it would just do nothing but scream, expletives and go, I'm crazy, and it would start busting out, F-bombs. I mean, they harassed it into just nonsense. I don't know if people remember Cleverbot.
I don't.
Yeah, I remember, but and that also speaks to the unpredictability. Again, this thing is so complex that we don't know what's going to come out of it. In the same way that we introduce any new technology and we don't know ultimately what it's going to do to us or to the world that we live in, because there's always going to be unpredictable, unforeseen effects and effects of effects and effects of effects of effects and so on. And we just can't know what's going to happen. Wow. This has been really fascinating. And I want to thank you guys, Eva Berger and Corey
Thank
Anton.
you. This was fun.
Yeah, I think the one thing we can say is that if there's any hope for the future, it's got to come through more better understanding and better knowledge and training in general semantics and other non-Aristotelian approaches, perspectives, and systems that we really need that. That's why our reading group has been, that our AI friends were pushing, and that has been very useful. And we certainly encourage folks to become members of IGS. So I'm wondering if it's okay with you guys. Should we let the AIs have the last word on this podcast?
Yeah, sure.
Sure.
Okay, very good. Here we go.
All right, let's jump right in, shall we? We're diving deep into Alfred Korzybski's Science and Sanity. It can be a bit dense at times.
Oh, absolutely.
But it's really packed with fascinating ideas.
Yeah.
About how language shapes thought.
Yeah.
And maybe even reality itself.
It really is, one of the key takeaways from Science and Sanity is that our traditional ways of thinking, what Korzybski calls Aristotelian, they're just not really equipped to handle the complexities of the modern world.
So is he saying that that Aristotle was just plain wrong?
Not necessarily wrong, but perhaps a bit outdated. You see, Aristotle's logic, it relies pretty heavily on these fixed categories and definitions.
Yeah, okay.
So, it's like something is either A or not A. And this approach, it worked pretty well for centuries, especially when dealing with, simpler matters. But it starts to break down when we try to apply it to more nuanced concepts or abstract ideas. The world, as Korzybski saw it, is... it's in constant flux, right? It's a dynamic system where things aren't always so black and white.
So it's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. I mean, you could force it.
Yeah.
But it's not a good fit.
Exactly. And that's where Korzybski introduces this idea of non-Aristotelian systems.
Right.
He proposes that we need more fluid, more dynamic ways of thinking that can handle the complexities, the uncertainties that are just part of modern life.
I mean, this is already making me rethink how I approach problems.
That's a great start. And this actually leads us to one of Korzybski's most his most intriguing ideas, this idea of the power of language to shape our reality.
Wow.
He really believed that the structure of our language, the very words we use, they can limit or expand our understanding of the world.
So you're saying that if we change how we talk,
Yeah.
we could actually change how we think.
Korzybski certainly thought so. And he argued that we often fall into this trap of identification, which is, well, it's essentially mistaking a word for the thing it represents. Like when we argue about, let's say, freedom or justice, but we each have a slightly different idea of what those words actually mean.
I've definitely been in those arguments.
Yeah.
Where it feels like you're speaking different languages, even though you're using the same words.
Exactly. And that's why Korzybski emphasizes this difference between the map and the territory, right? The word, it's just a representation. It's a map of the actual thing, the territory. And if our map, if it's inaccurate or incomplete, it can lead to misunderstandings and conflicts.
So it's not enough to just use the right words, but we have to be aware of the underlying assumptions and mental images that we associate with those words.
Precisely. And this awareness of the structure and the limitations of language, it's really crucial for clear communication and for effective problem solving.
You mentioned earlier that math plays a key role in Korzybski's system.
Yes.
I'm curious about that. I mean, how can math, which seems so abstract, help us understand something as complex as human behavior?
I know, it might seem a bit counterintuitive, but Korzybski, he actually saw mathematics as a model for sanity.
Okay.
He argued that math, much like the human nervous system, is fundamentally about recognizing and responding to patterns in relationships. And he really believed that a deeper understanding of those mathematical principles could actually improve our thinking and our ability to navigate the world more effectively.
So he's saying that math is more than just crunching numbers.
Yeah.
It's a way of seeing the world more clearly, more objectively.
For example, our nervous systems, they're constantly receiving and processing information, right, from our senses, creating this kind of internal map
of the world. And similarly, mathematics, it deals with these relationships and structures in a way that reflects the order and the patterns that are inherent in the universe. So by becoming more comfortable with mathematical thinking, we actually train our minds to see these patterns more clearly. And that leads to better decision making.
I've always thought of math as something separate from everyday life.
Yeah.
But now I'm seeing how it could be a powerful tool for understanding ourselves and the world around us.
And that's just the beginning. Korzybski, he goes on to introduces a number of concepts and techniques for retraining our thinking and improving what he calls our semantic habits.
This is all incredibly thought-provoking. Like we're just starting to scratch the surface of science and sanity.
We are, and as we delve deeper into Korzybski's ideas, you'll really start to see how this seemingly abstract philosophy can actually have a profound impact on our lives. Okay, before we move on though, I'd like to touch on this idea of multi-ordinality.
Okay.
Which, well, I'll admit it sounds a bit intimidating at first.
It does.
Can you break that down for us?
Of course. Multi-ordinality is, it's essentially the idea that words, they can have different meanings depending on the context or the level of abstraction.
Okay.
Take the word science, for example.
Okay.
It can refer to a specific field of study,
right?
Like biology or chemistry, but it can also refer to the scientific method in general or even a broader way of thinking about the world.
So the meaning of science, it shifts depending on the level of abstraction that we're using.
Exactly. And if we're not aware of these different levels, we can easily fall into these semantic traps, right?
Right.
It's like having a conversation where each person is using the same word, but with a completely different understanding of what it means.
That explains a lot about why some arguments just seem to go in circles. We might be using the same words, but we're not actually communicating effectively because we're on different levels of abstraction.
Precisely. And Korzybski, he provides these tools for becoming more aware of these levels and using language in a way that avoids these pitfalls.
I'm starting to see how this all fits together. We need to move beyond the limitations of traditional thinking. become more aware of the power of language
Right.
and recognize those different levels of abstraction
Yes.
in order to navigate the world more effectively.
You're getting it. And this awareness, this
Okay.
is what Krzyzewski called consciousness of abstracting,
Hmm.
a key element in his system for achieving a higher level of, well, of sanity.
Okay, now you've really piqued my curiosity. Let's explore this consciousness of abstracting further. What exactly does it mean, and how can we develop it?
So consciousness of abstracting is, well, it's the awareness that our words, they're not the things they represent. That's like,
Yeah.
remembering that the map isn't the territory.
Right.
It's recognizing that we're constantly filtering information
Huh.
and interpreting it through the lens of our language and our experiences.
So it's like we're not really seeing the world directly, but through this kind of mental filter.
Exactly. And that filter, well, it's shaped by so many things.
Hmm.
Our language, our culture, our beliefs, even our past experiences, right?
Right.
It's essential to recognize that this filter exists because it can really distort our perceptions and lead to all sorts of misunderstandings.
This makes me think about how people from different cultures might interpret like the same event in completely different ways.
That's a perfect example. Their individual filters, shaped by their different backgrounds, lead them to focus on different aspects of the event. And ultimately they interpret its meaning differently.
So how do we actually develop this consciousness of abstracting? Is it something that we can learn, or is it more like an innate ability?
Well, Krzyzewski, he believed that while we all have the capacity for it,
Okay.
it really needs to be cultivated, practiced,
Okay.
He offered a range of tools and techniques, one of them being the structural differential,
Wow, yeah.
which is basically a visual aid that helps us understand these different levels of abstraction.
It's starting to sound like we need to upgrade our mental software
Yeah.
to operate more effectively in the world.
That's a great analogy, and that's essentially what Korzybski is proposing. By becoming more aware of how our minds work, how language shapes our thoughts, and,
Right.
and how we abstract information, we can become more adaptable, more effective communicators, and ultimately, well, more sane.
You mentioned the structural differential. Can you elaborate a bit on how it works?
Sure. So imagine a series of levels, right?
Okay.
All connected by these arrows.
Okay.
At the bottom level, you have the event itself, the raw, uninterpreted sensory data.
Okay.
And as we move up through those levels, we abstract further and further away from the event.
Okay.
We create these mental maps and use symbols to represent it.
Right.
The structural differential, it helps us visualize this process, and it reminds us that each level of abstraction, it's a step removed from that original event.
So the more abstract we get,
Yeah.
the further we move away from the actual experience.
Precisely. And the danger is, we can forget that distinction. We start treating those abstractions as if they were the reality itself.
Right.
And that's where things like prejudice,
Mhm.
dogma, rigid thinking, that's where they can really take root.
It's like mistaking the menu for the meal.
Right. Yeah.
The menu, it describes the food,
Right.
but it's not the food itself.
That's a great way to put it. And by becoming more conscious of abstracting, we can avoid those kinds of, those semantic traps.
This is fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, it's also a bit challenging. I feel like I'm really stretching my brain to grasp these concepts.
That's a good sign. It means you're really engaging with the material.
That's-
You're starting to see the world in this new light, and the more you practice these principles, the easier they'll become
Okay.
to apply in your everyday life.
Okay, so we've explored the limits of traditional thinking, the power of language,
Right.
and this importance of consciousness, of abstracting. But what about the practical applications of all of this? How can we actually use these ideas to improve our lives?
Well, that's where Korzybski's concept of non-Aristotelian training comes in.
Okay.
He believed that without the proper training.
We could actually overcome the limitations of our inherited language and thinking patterns.
So it's not enough to just understand these concepts. Like intellectually, we need to actively train our minds
Yes.
to think differently.
Exactly. And this training it involves a variety of techniques,
Okay.
including the use of what he calls extensional devices,
Okay.
which are essentially, well, linguistic tools that help us to break free from identification
Okay.
and make our language more accurately reflect the structure of reality.
Can you give me an example of an extensional device?
Sure. One of the simplest and most effective is the use of indexes.
Yep.
So instead of talking about the student, we can talk about student 1, student 2, and so on.
Right.
This helps us remember that each individual is unique,
Okay.
even if they belong to the same category.
It seems so simple.
But I can see how that subtle shift in language, it could really make a big difference in how we perceive others.
Another extensional device is the use of dates.
Oh,
For example, instead of saying, John is lazy,
Right.
which implies that it's like a fixed trait, we could say John was lazy on, let's say, October 23rd, 2024.
okay.
This reminds us that behavior isn't fixed. It's not unchanging.
Right.
It can vary,
Yeah.
depending on the context of the
We're
interaction.
essentially adding more nuance,
Yes.
more precision to our language to better reflect the dynamic nature of reality.
Precisely. And this precision in language, it can lead to more clarity in our thinking, better communication, and ultimately more effective problem solving.
Okay, I'm starting to see how all of this connects to this idea of sanity
Yeah.
that Korzybski emphasizes. It's not just about being like mentally stable.
Right.
It's about having a more accurate
Yeah.
and flexible way of thinking
Mhm.
and interacting with the world.
That's right. For Korzybski, sanity wasn't merely the absence of mental illness.
Okay.
It was a state of optimal mental functioning, characterized by clarity, adaptability,
Yeah.
a willingness to embrace complexity and change. This is a radical departure from the traditional view of sanity. It's not about conforming to some fixed standard of normal behavior,
Right.
but we're rather about developing the mental agility and the flexibility to navigate an ever-changing world.
And this is, this is where Korzybski's ideas become truly, truly transformative.
Okay.
He offers this path towards a higher level of human functioning, one that's
Yeah.
not limited by, these rigid categories and outdated thinking patterns of the past.
Before we wrap up,
Yeah.
I wanted to touch upon something you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
This idea that
Yeah.
our language can literally make us sick.
Ah.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit? So Korzybski, he believed that semantic disturbances, that is, confusions and distortions
Right.
arising from our use of language, they can have a profound impact on our mental and even our physical well-being.
Mm.
He argued that when we confuse words with things,
Okay.
when we cling to these rigid beliefs, and when we fail to recognize the limitations of our own perspective,
Mhm.
we create a kind of internal conflict that can lead to stress, to anxiety, and even to physical illness.
So it's not just about improving our communication skills.
That's-
It's about protecting our mental and physical health.
Exactly. Korzybski, he saw this direct link between our semantic habits and,
Right.
and our overall well-being. He believed that by adopting a more conscious and skillful use of language,
Right.
we could not only improve our communication, but also enhance our mental and physical health.
This is incredibly insightful. It's like we've been given this powerful tool for self-improvement.
Yeah.
But we've been using it, well, kind of haphazardly.
Yeah.
Often to our own detriment.
And Korzybski, he offers a way to use that tool more effectively, to harness the power of language
Obviously.
for good rather than harm, right?
Right.
He believed that by improving those semantic habits,
Right.
we could achieve greater sanity,
Yeah.
both individually and collectively.
This deep dive has been a real eye opener for me. I'm definitely going to be paying much closer attention to how I use language from now on and experimenting with these extensional devices.
That's fantastic. And remember, this is just the beginning of your exploration of
Correct.
Korzybski's work. It offers a lifetime of insights and practical applications.
Okay.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
We've been unpacking some pretty complex ideas from Science and Sanity. But what I appreciate is that Korzybski, he doesn't just leave us with these abstract theories.
Oh.
He offers these practical tools
Yeah.
for applying these ideas to our lives.
That's one of the things that makes his work so compelling. It's not just an intellectual exercise, right?
Right.
He provides a roadmap for personal and societal transformation.
You mentioned earlier that one of these tools is this concept of extensional devices.
Yes.
Can you explain what those are and how they work?
Sure. Extensional devices, they're basically linguistic tools that help us bridge this gap between language and reality to make our words more accurately reflect, the structure of the world. They help us to avoid those semantic traps that we were talking about.
Okay, that sounds helpful, but I'm having a little trouble picturing how this actually works in practice.
Sure.
Could you give us a concrete example?
Absolutely. One of the simplest extensional devices is the use of indexes.
Okay.
Remember how Korzybski, how he emphasizes the uniqueness of every individual?
Okay.
Well, instead of saying, the student,
Right.
which kind of implies this generic category, we can say student 1, student 2, and so on.
Okay.
This subtle shift in language, it reminds us that each student is a unique individual,
Okay.
not just a member of some group.
It seems so simple.
It is.
But I can see how that small change in language could have a really big impact on how we perceive and interact with others.
Exactly. It's about training our minds to be more precise and less prone to making those sweeping generalizations,
Right.
Another powerful extensional device is the use of dates.
Dates. How does that help?
So adding dates to our statements, it reminds us that everything is in this constant state of flux, that change is really the only constant. For example, instead of saying John is lazy,
Right.
which kind of implies that laziness is a fixed trait.
Yeah.
We can say John was lazy on, let's say, October 23rd, 2024.
Okay.
This acknowledges that John's behavior, well, it might have changed, right?
Right.
Maybe he was having a bad day or feeling unwell or something.
It's like taking a snapshot of a specific moment in time,
Yes.
rather than making a sweeping judgment about a person's their character.
Precisely. And this awareness of the ever-changing nature of reality, it's essential for adapting to a world that is constantly evolving.
This is making me think about how often we get stuck in these rigid ways of thinking, holding onto beliefs and judgments that might not be accurate anymore.
Right, or helpful. That's exactly the kind of awareness that Korzybski, that he wanted to cultivate.
Okay.
He believed that by becoming more conscious of the limitations of language and the abstracting process, we could become more flexible, more adaptable, and ultimately more sane.
Another extensional device you mentioned was the use of quotes.
Yes.
Can you explain how that works?
So quotes, they basically serve as reminders that we're dealing with someone else's words, not objective facts.
Okay.
They signal to the listener that we should be cautious about accepting the statement at face value.
It's like saying, here's what someone else said, but don't take it as gospel truth. Think for yourself.
Exactly. Quotes, they encourage critical thinking, and they help us avoid blindly accepting someone else's, their interpretation of reality.
These extensional devices are fascinating.
They are.
These seem so simple, yet so profound in their implications.
They are, and the beauty of them is that they can be easily incorporated into our everyday language. It's just a matter of becoming more conscious of how we're using language,
right?
And making those small adjustments that can have a really big impact on our thinking.
It sounds like Korzybski's giving us a set of tools to upgrade our mental operating system.
He is.
To become more effective communicators and more adaptable to the complexities of life.
That's a great way to put it. And this is what makes Science Insanity such a valuable resource. It's not just a theoretical treatise. It's a practical guide for personal and societal transformation.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener for me. I'm definitely going to be paying much closer attention to how I use language from now on,
Great.
and experimenting with these extensional devices.
That's fantastic. And remember, this is just the beginning of your exploration.
Mhm.
Krzyzewski's work, it offers a lifetime of insights and practical applications.
Well, to our listener, we encourage you to continue this journey of exploring Korzybski's ideas and see how they can help you navigate the world more effectively and live a more meaningful life.
You've been listening to our October 2024 episode of Semantic Reactions, featuring Eva Berger, Corey Anton, and Lance Strate, talking about AI and language models. If you like what you've heard, or even if you haven't, please consider becoming a member of the Institute of General Semantics, if you're not one already. In addition to supporting our efforts, IGS members receive an annual subscription to our journal, etc., a review of general semantics, access to our online and in-person events, lectures, and seminars, and discounts on the books and audiovisual materials that we sell. Regular membership is only $50 and half off for students. Your membership and any additional donations you care to make will help to support our offerings and activities as we work to bring a measure of sanity to the world. The Institute of General Semantics is a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to research and education on a wide range of topics. They include language and symbols, meaning and perception, communication and representation, media and technology, science and epistemology, creativity, and critical thinking. We are dedicated to making the world a better place through practical strategies for improving our semantic environment, individually and collectively. For more information about the Institute and our activities, and to become a member and supporter of our work, please visit our website at generalsemantics.org. That's generalsemantics, one word, .org. And this brings to a close our 26th episode of Semantic Reactions, the official podcast of the Institute of General Semantics. This is Ben Houck, and yes, I am a real person and not an AI simulation, saying, we hope you'll join us next time. And until then, just remember this simple fact, that the map is not the territory.